The courtroom was hushed, the air heavy with anticipation. Judge Henry Calloway, a man renowned for his unyielding nature, loomed behind the elevated bench, flipping through the paperwork of yet another case. He barely glanced at the woman standing before him, her face pale and drawn. Grace Miller clutched her daughter Emma's tiny hand. The 6-year-old, with her untamed curls and mismatched shoes, gazed around the room, her innocent eyes a stark contrast to her mother's anxiety. Grace had hoped this moment would pass quickly, a routine parking violation, a simple plea, and then they could go back to their small life. "Miss Miller," Judge Calloway began, his voice cold and precise, "do you deny parking in a disabled space without a permit?" "No, Your Honor," Grace whispered, her voice trembling. She wanted to explain, to tell him about the feverish night when Emma needed her asthma medicine. But before she could, a tiny voice broke through the oppressive silence. "I'm hungry." The courtroom froze. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Grace's heart plummeted as she turned to her daughter in disbelief. Emma's wide-eyed expression was one of pure innocence. "Emma," Grace hissed, her face burning. "Not now." But the damage was done. Every eye in the room was fixed on the little girl. Even Judge Calloway seemed taken aback. For a moment his pen hung in the air, his severe features softening into something unreadable. "You're hungry?" he asked, his tone neither harsh nor mocking but curious. Emma nodded solemnly. "We didn't have breakfast." The murmurs grew louder, the once intimidating courtroom now tinged with amusement and disbelief. Grace's humiliation deepened as her daughter continued, oblivious to the tension around her. "Pancakes would be nice," Emma added confidently. And then the impossible happened. Judge Calloway's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. The room fell silent again, waiting for his response. "Pancakes," he repeated, leaning back in his chair. For the first time in his long career, the stern judge appeared. "Human." Grace braced herself for reprimand, but instead the judge looked at Emma and said, "We'll take a short recess." The courtroom erupted into murmurs of disbelief as Judge Calloway stood, his black robe billowing as he exited. Grace stared after him, her pulse racing. For the first time that morning, a spark of hope flickered in her heart. Something had changed. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as the judge disappeared through the side door. Grace stood frozen, holding Emma's hand tightly. Her heart pounded in her chest, confusion swirling with an inexplicable hope. Around her, whispers floated like scattered leaves. Did the judge really just call a recess for pancakes? Never seen Judge Calloway do something like this. Maybe the kid's honesty got to him. Emma, unbothered by the attention, tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, do you think he's getting pancakes?" she asked, her voice full of innocent wonder. Grace crouched down, her voice a shaky whisper. "Emma, you can't just say things like that in court. Do you know how serious this is?" "But I am hungry," Emma replied, her tone unrepentant, her little hands fidgeting with the hem of her dress. And he didn't seem mad. Grace opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the bailiff approached. His face, typically stern, carried a hint of a smile. "Miss Miller, the judge has requested you wait here. He'll be back shortly." Grace nodded, unable to muster words. The weight of the courtroom returned as she sat down at the defendant's table. Emma perched beside her. The little girl swung her legs idly, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to her mother's fraught silence. Minutes passed like hours before the heavy doors behind the bench opened. Judge Calloway re-entered, his robe flowing with authority. Yet something was different. His face, normally etched with unyielding severity, carried an air of quiet thoughtfulness. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and cleared his throat. The room fell silent. "Ms. Miller," he began, his voice steady but softer than before, "I've reviewed your case during the recess, and I took a moment to reflect." Grace swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the table. Her mind raced. Reflect? What did he mean? The judge's eyes fell on Emma, whose curious gaze met his without a trace of fear. "Young lady," he said, addressing the little girl, "do you know what happens in courtrooms like this?" Emma shook her head. "No, but it looks like everyone is waiting for you to say something." A ripple of subdued laughter broke the tension, and Grace's face flushed. "I apologize, Your Honor," she began, but Judge Calloway held up a hand. "There's no need," he said, his tone unexpectedly kind. Turning his gaze back to Grace, he continued, "Let's address the matter at hand. But first—" He gestured to the bailiff, who nodded and exited the room. Grace's brow furrowed as she tried to understand what was happening. Moments later, the bailiff returned, carrying a small bag. He placed it on the judge's desk before stepping aside. Judge Calloway opened the bag, revealing 2 neatly wrapped breakfast plates. The scent of syrup and warm pancakes wafted through the room. The judge looked directly at Emma. "You mentioned pancakes," he said. "I thought it might be best to address that first." The courtroom erupted into soft laughter, and Grace's eyes filled with tears of disbelief. Emma beamed, clapping her hands together. "Thank you," she exclaimed. Judge Calloway smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "Miss Miller," he said, his voice firm but kind, "let's take care of this parking ticket. But first, let's make sure no one's hungry." As Emma dug into the unexpected breakfast, Grace felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in years, a sense that maybe, just maybe, kindness could exist in the most unlikely places. The courtroom remained hushed as Emma happily ate her pancakes, entirely unaware of the whirlwind her small request had created. Grace, however, was acutely aware. She sat stiffly, unsure of how to interpret the judge's unexpected gesture. Was it kindness? A prelude to leniency? Or something else entirely? When Emma finished, she patted her hands on her dress and gave the judge a bright smile. "Thank you, Judge," she chirped. The room rippled with soft laughter again, the gallery seeming to share in the warmth of the moment. Judge Calloway leaned forward slightly, his stern demeanor softened but still carrying the weight of authority. "Now that we've taken care of breakfast," he said, his voice steady, "let's address the matter at hand." Grace swallowed hard, her throat dry despite the moisture pooling in her eyes. She hadn't even begun to plead her case, but already the gravity of the moment weighed heavily on her. "Miss Miller," the judge continued, flipping through the file on his desk. "You parked in a disabled spot without a permit, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Grace replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She felt every eye in the room on her, the weight of their judgment adding to her shame. "I didn't mean to. Judge Calloway raised a hand, silencing her gently. "Tell me why," he said simply, his gaze piercing but not unkind. Grace hesitated, her fingers tightening on the edge of the table. She glanced at Emma, who was now swinging her legs cheerfully, unaware of the tension. Taking a deep breath, Grace began. "My daughter was sick," she said, her voice trembling. "She has asthma and her breathing was bad that night. I parked there because it was the closest spot to the pharmacy. I just needed her medicine. It was late, and I wasn't thinking." Her words spilled out, raw and unpolished. The courtroom listened in silence, the gallery no longer amused but thoughtful. Even Judge Calloway seemed to soften further, his usual stern expression replaced by one of quiet contemplation. "And the ticket?" he asked. "I didn't see it until the next morning," Grace admitted. "I wanted to pay it, but I couldn't. I worked 2 jobs just to keep us afloat. I didn't have the money." Her voice cracked, and she looked down, ashamed. "I know I broke the law, Your Honor. I'm not trying to make excuses. She paused, fighting back tears. "I just didn't know what else to do." The silence that followed was heavy. Judge Calloway steepled his fingers, his sharp eyes fixed on her. For a moment Grace thought she had said too much, that her desperation would be seen as weakness or an attempt to manipulate him. Then he spoke. "Being a mother is one of the hardest jobs there is," he said, his tone carrying a rare note of understanding. It requires sacrifices most people can't imagine. But even in difficult circumstances, the law exists to protect everyone, especially those in need. Grace nodded, her tears falling freely now. I know, Your Honor. I'm sorry. Judge Calloway held her gaze for a long moment before turning to Emma, who was watching him curiously. Your mother works very hard for you, doesn't she? Emma nodded enthusiastically. She works all the time, she said matter-of-factly. But she still makes me cookies sometimes. A soft chuckle rippled through the room. Grace covered her face, overwhelmed by her daughter's honesty. The judge, however, didn't laugh. He simply nodded. Miss Miller, he said, his voice firm but no longer cold. Let me think on this for a moment. Bailiff will resume shortly. As the judge stood and left the courtroom once more, Grace exhaled shakily, her heart pounding. For the first time, she felt like someone had truly seen her. Not just as a woman who had broken a rule, but as a mother doing her best to survive. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as Judge Calloway exited for a second time. Grace sat motionless, her hands trembling in her lap. Emma, oblivious to the weight of the moment, drew swirls with her fingers on the tabletop, her innocence a small comfort in the storm raging inside her mother. Mommy? Emma whispered, tugging at Grace's sleeve. Do you think the judge is mad at us? Grace swallowed hard, brushing a stray curl from Emma's forehead. I don't know, sweetheart, she said softly, forcing a smile. We just have to wait and see. Minutes felt like hours before the heavy doors swung open again. Judge Calloway returned, his presence commanding as he strode to his seat. The courtroom fell silent, anticipation thick in the air. The judge adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and looked directly at Grace. Miss Miller, he began, his voice calm but resolute, I've had time to review your case further, and I've come to a decision. Grace's heart raced, her breath caught in her chest. She braced herself for what felt inevitable, a fine she couldn't pay, a punishment she couldn't escape. First, Judge Calloway said, let me make one thing clear. The law must be upheld. Parking in a disabled spot without a permit, regardless of the circumstances, is a violation. Grace felt her stomach drop. The judge's firm tone left no room for interpretation. However, he continued, his gaze softening, the law also recognizes that justice must be tempered with understanding. Your situation, working 2 jobs, raising your daughter alone, and facing an emergency, cannot be ignored. The gallery stirred with quiet murmurs of surprise, and Grace's head shot up, her eyes wide with hope she barely dared to feel. With that in mind, Judge Calloway said, leaning forward, I am dismissing the $200 fine. The room erupted into gasps and scattered applause, but Grace barely noticed. Her vision blurred with tears, her hands flying to her mouth as relief washed over her like a wave. Your Honor, she stammered, her voice breaking. Thank you. I don't know what to say. Judge Calloway raised a hand to quiet the room. I'm not finished, Miss Miller. The applause died instantly, and the judge's gaze turned serious once more. While this fine is dismissed, I recognize that your challenges extend far beyond this courtroom. No mother should have to choose between her child's health and the fear of financial ruin. He gestured to the bailiff, who handed Grace a neatly folded sheet of paper. This, the judge explained, is a list of local resources for single parents, child care assistance, job training programs, and most importantly, information on a fully funded online degree program. These opportunities can help you build a more stable future for yourself and your daughter. Grace unfolded the paper with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the words that seemed to glimmer with promise. I don't know what to say, she whispered again, her voice thick with emotion. You don't need to say anything, Judge Calloway replied, his expression softening further. Justice isn't just about enforcing the law. It's about understanding the people it serves. Emma tugged at Grace's arm, her little voice breaking the silence. Mommy, does this mean we can go now? A soft wave of laughter rippled through the room, breaking the tension. Judge Calloway chuckled, a sound so rare it startled even the bailiff. "Yes, young lady," the judge said warmly. "This case is dismissed." For the first time in months, Grace felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope. As she gathered her things and led Emma out of the courtroom, she clutched the list of resources to her chest like a lifeline. The applause followed her out, but all she could hear was Emma's voice, bright and fearless. "See, Mommy? Pancakes do make people happy." And for the first time in years, Grace allowed herself to laugh. A sound light and full of possibilities, just like the future that suddenly felt a little brighter. The world outside the courthouse felt brighter, though it was the same gray cityscape Grace and Emma had walked through earlier. As they stepped out onto the bustling Brooklyn street, Grace inhaled deeply, the crisp air filling her lungs with a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. "Mommy," Emma chirped, skipping alongside her. "Can we get more pancakes now?" Grace laughed softly, the sound surprising even herself. "We'll see, sweetheart," she replied, her voice lighter than it had been in months. She glanced down at the paper clutched in her hand, the list of resources Judge Calloway had provided. Each line felt like a door waiting to be opened. Later that evening, in the small apartment they called home, Grace sat at the rickety kitchen table while Emma played with her stuffed bunny on the couch. The list lay in front of her, its words illuminated by the flickering light of the old desk lamp. Child Care Assistance Program. Grace circled the contact information, her mind racing with possibilities. Reliable child care would mean fewer rushed mornings and more time to focus on building a stable life. Job training and placement services. She underlined the entry, imagining herself in a position that didn't require working 2 exhausting jobs just to make ends meet. Fully funded online degree program. Her hand trembled as she traced the words with her fingertip. College had been a distant dream, something she'd abandoned years ago when life became about survival instead of aspirations. Could this really be a second chance? "Mommy?" Emma's voice broke her thoughts. She turned to see her daughter standing beside her, holding out a drawing. On the paper was a crayon sketch of a tall man in black robes, standing beside a smiling little girl with pancakes in her hands. Grace smiled, tears welling up again. "Is that Judge Calloway?" she asked. Emma nodded. "He made you happy today, and you don't cry when you're happy." Grace pulled her daughter into a tight hug, her tears spilling freely. "You're right, baby. I don't cry when I'm happy." That night, after Emma had fallen asleep clutching her bunny, Grace made a decision. She dialed the first number on the list. The voice on the other end was warm, welcoming, and full of reassurance. "You're not alone, Miss Miller," the person said. "We'll help you every step of the way." For the first time in years, Grace felt the heavy weight on her shoulders begin to lift. She sat by the window, the city lights twinkling outside, and allowed herself to dream again. Somewhere in a quiet corner of the city, Judge Calloway sat in his study, reading through case files. He paused, his mind drifting back to the little girl who'd asked for pancakes and the mother who'd fought so hard for her. A small smile tugged at his lips. Maybe the law wasn't just about rules. Maybe sometimes it was about second chances. Over the following weeks, Grace's life began to shift in ways she had never thought possible. The list Judge Calloway had given her became a roadmap to something she hadn't dared to hope for, a better future. Each day brought a small step forward, but even the smallest steps felt monumental. The first breakthrough came when Grace secured childcare assistance. Emma now attended a vibrant community program, where she thrived among other children her age. Grace's mornings no longer felt like a frantic blur, and knowing Emma was in good hands allowed her to focus on the next steps. The next milestone was even more daunting, job training. Grace enrolled in a program specializing in culinary arts, her passion. It felt surreal sitting in a classroom again, her notebook open, her pen poised over blank pages. Doubts nagged at her. She was older than the other students, and the years of struggle had left her confidence frayed. But then she thought of Emma, her bright smile, her unwavering belief that her mother could do anything. That thought carried her through every lesson, every test, and every sleepless night spent studying after long days at work. One evening, as Grace reviewed her coursework at the kitchen table, Emma climbed onto the chair beside her. "What you doing, Mommy?" she asked, resting her chin on her hands. "Studying," Grace replied with a smile. "I'm learning how to make fancier cakes and cookies." Emma's eyes lit up, like the ones in the bakery window. "Exactly," Grace said, pulling her daughter close. "And one day I'll make the best cakes in the city." Emma nodded solemnly, as if it were a fact already written in the stars. "I can help. I'm good at sprinkles." Grace laughed, her heart full. "Yes, you are." But the most transformative moment came when Grace opened her email to find an acceptance letter to the online degree program. She read the words over and over, scarcely believing they were real. For years, college had seemed like an unattainable dream, a luxury for someone else's life. Now, it was her reality. She shared the news with Emma over a celebratory dinner of macaroni and cheese. "Mommy's going to school," Grace announced, her voice trembling with excitement. Emma clapped her hands, her face glowing with pride. "Does this mean you'll have homework too?" Grace grinned. "Yes, it does. But we can do it together." The days turned into weeks and the weeks into months. Grace juggled her classes, her job training, and her new responsibilities with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Emma thrived, her days filled with laughter and learning. They became a team, supporting each other through every challenge. One crisp autumn morning, as they walked hand in hand to Emma's program, Grace felt a warmth in her chest. The city no longer felt like an endless maze of struggles. It felt like home. A place where second chances were possible and where love and determination could build bridges to a brighter future. Far away in his chambers, Judge Calloway received a letter. It was simple, handwritten, and signed with a name he hadn't forgotten. "Dear Judge Calloway, I wanted to thank you. Not just for dismissing the ticket, but for what you gave me that day. Hope. Because of your kindness, I found a path forward for myself and my daughter. I'm studying, learning, and building a future I never thought I could have. Emma talks about you often. She says you're the judge who listens to hungry little girls. You changed our lives, and I'll never forget it. With gratitude, Grace Miller." Judge Calloway read the letter twice, his stern demeanor softening as he set it down. He leaned back in his chair, staring out the window at the city below. A rare smile crossed his face as he thought of Grace and Emma, two lives he had touched in a way he hadn't expected. Sometimes, he realized, the smallest gestures could build the strongest bridges. A year later, life looked very different for Grace and Emma. Their once cramped apartment now felt like a sanctuary, not just because of its small, cozy touches. A hand-sewn quilt draped over the couch, Emma's crayon drawings proudly displayed on the fridge, but because it was filled with something new. Hope. Grace had graduated from her job training program at the top of her class and had landed a position as a pastry chef at a well-regarded bakery in downtown Brooklyn. The work was challenging, but every time she piped icing onto a cake or set fresh croissants in the display window, she felt pride swell in her chest. She was building something, not just for herself, but for Emma. The online degree program was also well underway. Grace spent her evenings poring over textbooks, her laptop open on the kitchen table, while Emma sat beside her coloring or working on her own homework. They had become a team in every sense of the word, cheering each other on through each small victory. One sunny autumn afternoon, the bakery held its annual charity event, a tradition where the proceeds from special pastries were donated to support community programs. Grace was tasked with designing the centerpiece cake, a towering confection of golden leaves and sugared flowers. It was her moment to shine, and she poured her heart into every detail. The event drew a large crowd, and as Grace bustled behind the counter, Emma tugged at her apron. "Mommy, someone's here to see you," she said, pointing toward the door. Grace turned, her breath catching in her throat. Standing near the entrance was Judge Calloway, his imposing figure framed by the afternoon sunlight. He looked as composed as ever, but his expression softened when he saw her. "Judge Calloway," Grace said, wiping her hands on her apron as she approached him. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I heard about the event," he replied, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "I thought I'd see what you've been up to." Grace gestured toward the bakery, her heart swelling with pride. "This is what I've been up to, and I have you to thank for it." He shook his head. "You're the one who did the work, Miss Miller. I just gave you a nudge." Emma appeared beside her, beaming. "Do you want pancakes, Judge?" she asked brightly. The judge chuckled, crouching slightly to meet Emma's gaze. "Not today," he said, his voice warm. "But I'll take one of those cookies if your mom made them." Emma grabbed a cookie from the display and handed it to him with a flourish. "Mommy makes the best cookies." "I don't doubt that," Judge Calloway said, taking a bite. His smile widened as he chewed. "Excellent work, as always." As the event wound down, Grace and Emma walked Judge Calloway to the door. Before he left, he turned back to Grace. "You've come a long way," he said, "and I have no doubt you'll go even further." "Thank you," Grace replied, her voice thick with emotion, "for everything." Judge Calloway nodded, then glanced at Emma. "You keep taking care of your mom, young lady." "I will," Emma promised, giving him a cheerful wave as he stepped outside. As Grace watched him disappear into the bustling street, she felt a deep sense of closure. The man, who had once been a symbol of fear and judgment, had become a symbol of kindness and change. And now, as she looked down at Emma's radiant face, she knew the future was theirs to shape together. That night, as they sat at the kitchen table sharing pancakes and laughter, Grace thought about how far they had come. The road ahead would still have challenges, but she no longer faced it with dread. She had strength, she had hope, and most of all, she had Emma. And as Emma leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, sleepy but content, she murmured, "See, Mommy, pancakes really do make people happy." Grace kissed her daughter's curls, a soft smile on her lips. "They do, baby, they really do." Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our latest videos. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Thank you all for taking the time to watch, and see you in the next video.